Stephanie Weaver here in the Blue and Yellow Kitchen, where cooking meets culture. And my guest today is the author of All Stirred Up, Suffrage Cookbooks, Food, and the Battle for Women's Right to Vote, my friend Laura Kumin. Hi, Laura. How are you?
Hi, Stephanie. Good. How are you doing?
Oh, good. It's so good to have you here in the kitchen. Full disclosure, Laura and I do know each other in real life. We met through our food blogs. Hers is called Mother Would Know. And we've had a meal together, and I've actually looked at the proposal for this cookbook before, or this book before Laura sold it. So I did want to disclose that. So not that I am prejudiced towards the book, but I am a little prejudiced towards the book just because I've known Laura quite a while and was really excited about this project. And I think when you, so we've got something in the oven that the timer's about to go off. So I think we're going to start by explaining what we're making, and then we'll get into the book because literally my timer will just about to go off. So I'm going to grab this and pull it out, and you can see step one of what we're making. So what I've got are tomato cups wrapped in bacon. And let me hold these so Laura can see.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah. So Laura, they're very juicy. Do you recommend kind of dumping the liquid out before putting the eggs in, or do you recommend just putting the eggs in because the liquid's fine in there?
Well, I recommend scooping out the flesh and really tipping it over and letting whatever juices you can run out. Another possibility is to put in a little bit of salt, let it sit for a few minutes, and then turn it over and let the extra liquid come out.
And I did do that, but now that once they've been baked, they're very juicy. So do I just put the eggs right in on top of that juice, or?
I would say tip a little bit of it out,
okay.
But there's no harm in it being juicy.
Okay, so what I'm going to do is
as long as the bacon is done, you're good.
Set this down. So these have been baking at 425 for about 20 minutes. And then the eggs are going to go in, and then they're going to bake another 8 to 10, and I don't actually think I can pick them up without them disintegrating. So that's not going to happen. So we're just going to put the eggs right in on top. That's the answer to that question. So it's just an egg. One egg goes in each cup.
So what are we making here?
So so what is it called in the book, Laura? Let's start there.
It's actually called breakfast dish.
Okay.
Which doesn't tell you what it is, but that was the name.
Okay, so we got an egg in each one. I'm going to put some pepper on top and maybe a little bit of salt. And you know what? Some egg is going to spill over the edge. That is okay. I like these quarter sheet pans because they're really easy to clean. So if you do have a little bit of a mess, you're fine. And don't forget the pan is still very hot, so you want to pick it back up with your hot pad. So these are going back in the oven. Daisy, please move out of the way, honey. Thank you. All right. 425 and another 10 minutes or so. And then we're going to talk about, so let me just get this set, and then we'll go ahead and jump into the book here. Okay, so, cool. Let's start with how the book, when did you find your first suffrage cookbook? So suffrage is the word for women being able to vote, correct?
Well, suffrage actually means anybody being able to vote.
Okay.
And in fact, it's become synonymous with women's suffrage, but suffrage can really mean anybody.
Okay. And so, and when did you buy a suffrage, find one as in a used bookstore? How did you start on this journey of writing All Stirred Up?
Well, I'm a great fan of online research, which I began when I did the Hamilton Cookbook. And I was looking through online resources, online digital libraries that were available to me. And I stumbled on one of the cookbooks. And there are 2 that you can buy reprints of. But the others, I was able to find all but 2 of them through online libraries.
Oh, that's so cool.
Digital versions of them.
Okay, gotcha. And so how many were there in total? How many suffrage cookbooks were produced?
Well, we'll never know how many there were in total. We now know of 7 or possibly 8, depending on how you count them. And those exist and we can see them. But there are tantalizing hints that there were others. And so, for example, there's one that no one has ever come up with that I think was created in Nebraska, and I would love to get a copy of it, or love to see it at least.
So, so what Laura did was she looked at all these cookbooks, but then also it's a complete overview of the entire women's suffrage movement, which was 70 years, so starting in 1848 until 1920 when the amendment to the Constitution was ratified. And so Laura takes you through the entire history. There's an amazing timeline that opens the book, so you can see not only what was happening with women's suffrage, but what else was happening in the world, and also what was happening with domestic science, because domestic science, or what Microwave Boy and I knew as home ec when we were in school, which I don't even think exists anymore, was the teaching of the tools of how do you manage a home. So it's cooking, laundry, all of those things. And so, and also you included kind of food, like prepared food discoveries, and like the invention of Jell-O, and just things that changed women's lives. And so and I think there's just some really interesting stuff in here that of course I didn't know. History was never my strong suit. So so this was just really an interesting read for me to learn about all the people that were involved and how long it really did take for the ratification. And then, of course, once it was ratified in 1920, that didn't mean black women got the vote, people of color got the vote. There was still quite a long process before everyone really got the right to vote, which you definitely cover in there. And then you also, so you took these old recipes and then you adapted them. So tell us about that process, because I'm gonna show, while you're doing that, I'm gonna show how to prep the tomato, because and before I let you talk a little bit more, these tomatoes are too small, so the egg will not fit in these. So you want to get ones that are good, like fit in your palm. I also would say don't bother making this dish with grocery store tomatoes. If you don't have access to farmers market tomatoes or homegrown, just wait until you do, because it's a disappointing result, because grocery store tomatoes just aren't high flavor, and so you definitely want a high flavor dish. So go ahead and tell us kind of how the process of laying out the book, what order you wanted to do things in, and then adapting the recipes.
I wanted to have recipes from each of the suffrage cookbooks that I found, and I actually was able to see all but one of them. So I wanted recipes from each of those, and I wanted recipes from sort of each part of a meal, or each part of what we think of as, the types of courses that you can have. And originally I was going to put all the recipes at the end, but my very smart editor said, no, they should go chapter by chapter. And so I saved, of course, the ones that I love the best, the desserts, for the very end. But after each chapter, there is a section of recipes. In the beginning, it's breakfast foods. Then it's, soups and salads. It's, vegetables and vegetarian main dishes. There are poultry. There's meat. There's basically something for everybody. And the way I adapted the recipes was I began the way I often begin with my food blog, which is to look at similar recipes. I get an idea, and then I look around. Nothing, hardly any recipes are created really totally from scratch. People get ideas. They're inspired by other people. And so I would look at how these recipes have evolved and how people are currently making them, if they are. For a couple of them, I have some very old versions of the Fannie Farmer cookbook, the Boston cookbook as it's known, and also one which is very popular in the Jewish community, known as the Settlement Cookbook. And so if I looked in those, I could often see the kinds of recipes that you just don't see anymore. An example of those would be the Sally Lunn biscuits. You don't see those in modern cookbooks, but they were very popular at the time, and they did make their way into lots of different cookbooks. So sometimes I'd have to kind of figure out how I wanted to adapt the recipe, try it, it didn't work, or it worked, but not to my satisfaction, and then I'd try it again.
Great.
You know, trial and error is often the way you get to the best possible result. I should also mention that in a lot of the recipes, I've mentioned ways in which I think it's more to our taste if you add some herbs, if you do it a slightly different way. I tried to stay true to the original recipe, but honestly, some of those original recipes, they just weren't flavorful enough. The foods were overcooked, which was very typical of food of that time.
Right.
So I tinkered with it.
Yeah. And also, you know, they didn't have like the refrigeration that we have. There was a lot of things where they might have really overcooked stuff just because they learned that people would get sick if things weren't overcooked. And so, you know, those are things that it is important, I think, to adapt. I did that with, I had Alia Volz on the show for her book Home Baked about her parents' edible brownies business. Edibles/brownies business in San Francisco, and the original 1970s recipe, I did my best to make it the way it had been written, and it just didn't produce the best tasting brownie. So I ended up adapting it. So it was kind of another example of, you know, and also, you know, sometimes like this, like the tomatoes that they would have had in, you know, the 1890s we're going to taste a lot better unless you're eating like an heirloom tomato here today. So what I've done, Laura, while you were talking, Laura, is I sliced the top off the tomato, and you can set aside that all that yumminess and put that in a tomato salad. And then I make sure I scraped all of the liquid and juice and everything out of the center of it, salted it a little bit, flipped it upside down to help some of that liquid drain out, and then I've wrapped it with bacon. And you make it very clear you need to use toothpicks, because otherwise, while it looks like it might stick, it will slide down, correct?
Right. And believe me, I did have some sliding bacon.
Yeah.
The first few times I tried it.
So we want to make sure that, you know, it kind of turns out how it's supposed to. And the timer's about to go off again, so I'm going to set this aside, my little demo here, and let me pull this guy out, because I thought the timer was about to go off. Very close. Let me take a look and see, and you can tell me if you think these are looking good. So there's a lot of juice and stuff that, oh no, they're definitely not set yet. Okay, so I'm going to show the camera. Let's see. Can you see that they're really wiggly? Yeah, so not cooked enough. So we're going to stick those back in, and I'll give those another maybe 3 minutes, I think. Okay. So.
How much time are they supposed to go?
You said 8 to 10 minutes once the eggs go in, Laura, is that right?
Let me see.
I think so.
So do you bake the tomato, bring it out?
You pre-bake the tomato with the bacon around it, because Laura said otherwise the tomato is still very firm, and she didn't really care for that, even though that was the original recipe. You also want to make sure the bacon is fully cooked. Clearly, that's for sure something you want to do. And then you want to bake them until the white is set. And if you like your yolks still kind of runny, which I do, that's an option. But you kind of just want to make sure that the egg is fully cooked in there.
So the first time was like 7 minutes?
First time was about 20 minutes.
20? Okay.
Yeah, with the bacon wrapped egg. And then once you put the egg in, about another 8 to 10, but we're giving it a couple more. And it just kind of depends, I think, also on the size of the tomato.
20 minutes without the egg.
20 minutes without the egg,
right.
And then another 8 to 10 minutes with the egg.
Right.
Yeah, so it's about 35 minute dish altogether. Does that sound right, Laura?
That's what the recipe calls for.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
All right, so while we're waiting for that to come out, so one of the things that you are very clear about is that there were white women that were involved in this fight, as well as white men, and then there were African Americans who were part of this movement, key players in it, and sometimes they worked together and sometimes they did not. And tell us of just a couple, maybe like one or two of the favorite people that you learned about that you didn't know about before that might be interesting for people.
Well, there were people that I knew about, but I had no idea that they were suffragists. So, for example, Frederick Douglass, if it were not for Frederick Douglass, there might not have been a suffrage movement, which I found fascinating. He was actually at the Seneca Falls Convention, and when it looked like the suffrage resolution, which was one of many resolutions about women's rights, but it looked like that was the only one that wasn't going to pass unanimously, and he stood up and spoke in favor of it. He really saved the day for suffrage.
Oh, that's so interesting.
The other person I really didn't know about as a suffragist was Sojourner Truth. And maybe you know the famous Ain't I a Woman?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that comes from a speech she gave at a suffrage convention. The other thing I learned about her, which it was truly fascinating, is that she grew up in a family where the first language was Dutch, not English. And it's really doubtful that the speech that she gave included the words, Ain't I a Woman? It was transcribed in dialect, probably by a white woman, but in fact, she probably spoke very good English, and probably it was not in that kind of dialect.
Interesting. Yeah, so that's another example of white women sort of speaking for and changing what black women maybe wanted to say or saying for themselves, which is not ideal, and we're all trying to address that now. It's an ongoing issue. Let me take a look at the eggs because the timer just went off again, and we'll see. Okay, those are looking much better. All right, I don't know if you're going to be able to see this, Laura, but let me try. Let's see. How do those look to you?
Oh, nice.
Do those look good? So what I'm looking at is I'm checking to see, do the whites look firm? They're still a little bit jiggly. This one is a bit more cooked, I think, than this guy. I'm going to put them in.
Bacon?
The bacon looks really nice and crispy, actually. So I think the bacon's good. I'm going to give them one more minute just to make sure. And then I'll navigate that out of the pan, which is going to be really fun. Okay, so one of the things that I thought was so fascinating, and I remember our conversation in DC a couple years ago where you talked about this, that one of the things that needed to happen in order for women to get the right to vote was that men had to decide they were okay with it. Because men were the only people who were in charge and had votes and were in legislatures. And so one of these strategies for getting men on board were these cookbooks, were ways that people were cooking at home. They had parties, they had lemonade gatherings, they ran lunchrooms that were very low cost, and then they had suffrage messages on the cups and the plates and banners, and there was a food truck, there was a donut campaign. So it was, I thought, so creative and interesting to hear about all these different ways that women around the country worked both in the states to try to get the individual states to go for women's suffrage, and then also at the federal level. What were some of your favorite things that you found out about?
Well, I think my absolute most favorite was something called the Suffrage Pig Campaign. You know, these days we have like cat memes. Well, out in rural areas, pigs can be very cute. And there were women suffragists, who were offering to send the pig. Each county was asked to provide some support to the suffrage movement and send their support to headquarters. So the women said, well, we'll send our pig. And the answer came back, maybe not. So instead of just simply selling it to a stockyard, the women turned this into sort of a campaign. And they had the suffrage pig, began to be in the newspaper, and they had vets who were offering to treat it for free, and they did, campaigns, take your picture with the pig, and it grew into this whole huge deal. And it let a lot more people know about suffrage than would have, just writing a check.
That's great.
Another way in which I just love this idea, in New York, one of the suffrage precinct captains found out about a new kind of washing machine, and she gave her individual, I don't know, they were probably like block captains, a machine. They would take it around and they would demonstrate it to the houses, to the women in the houses that they visited. If a woman liked the machine and wanted to buy it, she could buy it from them, and they would actually make, they would actually get a little bit of it was kind of an affiliate arrangement, shall we say. But in addition, after they did this demonstration with the washing machine, they talk about suffrage. So they not only brought suffrage into the house, but they brought it in a way that the people who answered the door really weren't expecting.
That's amazing. So I'm going to show you how this looks, because I think it looks actually really yummy.
Ooh, nice.
Yeah. So I'm going to bring this up to the camera so you all can see the close-up here. Yep. So you've got you can see that the edge of the tomato is really well cooked. You can see the edge of the crispy bacon. You can see that the egg is firm. And so I think I'm gonna need a sharper knife just to cut through the bacon. And I'm gonna have a little taste. And then let's talk about what's your takeaway from this book, Laura? What do you feel like you really want people to know?
I want people to understand that the suffrage movement wasn't just the loud women, and it wasn't just the women who were, that famous image of Inez Milholland on a white horse. It wasn't just the women who really were comfortable with attention, and in some cases they craved attention. In other cases, like the women who went on hunger strikes, they were quite militant. But, there were hundreds of thousands and maybe millions of women whose part in this change was really quiet, but it was no less effective. And it takes all kinds of people to make social change.
That's awesome.
And the social change that it made was not just about one political party or one point of view. It was really a change in the whole culture and in the whole, in the whole way we really think about who should be in politics and whose opinions matter.
That's great. So just had a taste. Super delicious. It's definitely something I would make again. The bacon is really warm and crispy on the edges. It's not crispy all the way around because, of course, it absorbs some of the liquid from the tomato. Tomatoes really, roasted tomatoes have that super kind of rich umami, concentrated flavor. The egg is perfectly cooked to my taste. It's still a little bit soft. I would for sure get some buttered toast to dip in this because there's a lot of yummy juices. It kind of reminds me of being in England and some of the breakfasts that I had in England when I was there. So we wanted to offer you two resources to encourage everyone to vote. So ballot tracks, BALLOTTRAX. If you search ballot tracks and your state, your individual ballot tracks will come up, and what that allows you to do is if you have registered or requested a mail-in vote, sometimes it's called absentee voting, sometimes it's called vote by mail in California. My great boy and I are both registered to vote by mail. It will tell you when your ballot gets mailed and when it gets received back. So it's very important this year to make sure that we get all our votes counted. We're probably gonna, once our ballots arrive, we are probably gonna fill them out right away and drive them over to the Registrar of Voters, to the drop box, just to make sure that they get there on time, because we really want our ballots to be counted. We want everyone's ballots to be counted this year. The other thing is vote.org. So if you're not sure if you're registered, if you know you're not registered, if you've been on the fence about it, go to vote.org. There's lots of resources to find out when in your state you can still register. Some states have, every state has different rules, so you need to make sure you follow those rules. And the other thing I wanted to just say is if you are voting by mail, and also if you're voting in person, a lot of states are doing in-person voting early. Go early. Maybe not the first day because that seems to be very busy, but make sure that you're not, to give yourself the best shot, don't, and you don't want to be waiting for 4 or 5 hours, especially with COVID. But make sure you read all of the rules. So every state has different rules. Make sure you sign it where they tell you to sign it. Make sure you tear off a thing if it tells you to tear it off. If there's a privacy envelope, like in Pennsylvania, make sure you put the ballot in that, because you don't want your vote to be invalidated because you didn't follow the rules. And they are always very strict, and I think we absolutely should trust the process, but just make sure that you're ready to go, that you've made a plan. If you're working on election day, vote the weekend before. If you know that you're not going to be able to do it in person, get yourself registered so that you can get a ballot in advance, because it's such an important election this year. So we want to thank you so much, Laura, for being here. This is an inspiring book if you're into history, if you're into women's rights. If you like cooking, it's really fun to see some of these older recipes that Laura's updated. And she also has a book called the Hamilton Cookbook. So if you're into Hamilton, you can find out what he ate. So I want to thank you so much for being here today. Please share this video. Encourage people. It's a nice, gentle way to encourage people to register and make sure they're going to vote this year. And you can follow Laura, motherwouldknow.com. You can follow me, S. Weaver, MPH. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you again soon in the Blue and Yellow Kitchen.
Check it out.